Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 13th of July, comes to you from London. And of course, the big news in markets is that US inflation number coming in at 3%, slightly below what the market expected. So that's having an impact on markets. And we'll look at currencies, then global stock indices, commodities, and last of all, the energy mix. And I might just take a quick look, share what I'm seeing in my own portfolio. So we start by looking at that inflation number, and really what's key there is this is a very long-term chart of inflation going back to the 1970s. And one of the things I proposed this morning just on LinkedIn was what would happen if you took that inflation number and you overlaid it. So you can do that. You can take data from any of the different feeds that you're compatible with and pulling into Updata. This is just coming from a spreadsheet, but I could compare it with data from over 30 different data sources coming in. And so basically I do that, and then I just go and grab that chart there and say, well, what would happen if we were lining up the 1970s? So quite interesting, we see that, and we just line up the peaks. And maybe, just maybe, we haven't seen the peak in inflation. This is what happened at the end of 1974, and some 5-6 years later we came back to have an even higher number. And we've run a poll on LinkedIn this morning, and it's interesting, about 3/4 of the market believes that US inflation is not yet under control, and that we may see inflation going higher again. So really quite interesting that whilst the market's relieved on that number short term, it doesn't truly believe that in the long run inflation is under control. Now let's look at the chart. So the dollar index, really just that big move yesterday. We see that there. That was the big move on the daily chart. Remembering this is my weekly, my daily, and my 60-minute, my long-term, medium-term, and short-term view of the market, and that's marked on my charts. It automatically recognizes whether I'm looking at long-term, medium-term, or short-term. And the 60-minute chart is clearly below the cloud, and that was actually the case running up to this announcement yesterday. So the market was already thinking that the dollar would fall on that news. And of course, we've made new lows, making new 15-month lows on the dollar. And we've now got downside targets pointing some 20% lower for the long term. But of course, in the short term, not so much. So if you're trading currencies, you really want to be looking at these shorter term charts right down to 1 minute for the targets. This is the euro, so euro against the dollar. Again, we ran a poll just over a week ago, and only 57% of the market thought the euro would go higher. 43% said it wouldn't make a new high, it would make a new low before it made a new high. Well, the new high people have got it right, and the targets are pointing there. We've got a long-term target to 142. That's a very hard number to believe, but that's what the charts are saying. 142 euro dollar on the long term, but short term we're seeing that target to 114. That's well underway. That's where we're heading right now. Looking at that dollar yen chart, we're seeing the dollar weaker against the yen. 145 was a level likely of Japanese intervention, but the market's now doing the job for them, and we're seeing here that is looking more and more like a lower high on the dollar yen chart. Looking at sterling, we're above that 130 level. No surprises there. Of course, UK interest rates set to go higher still. Inflation in the UK definitely not under control, anything like it is in the US, and so the market is really seeing that move. Sterling looking very bullish indeed, and if we look at sterling against the euro, we see that as well. We see pushing to 117.50. That's the highest level that we've seen again for about a year. So that's really significant there as well, and we've got upside targets to 119.83, 120. That's what we're looking at, and in fact I changed quite a lot of euros into sterling myself this morning. Looking at Bitcoin, we're seeing here that move there is really quite key. We've got a new upside potential target there. If we just hit the key, this column is now locked. 46,000, 54,000, 45,000, 50,000. So even though we're below the cloud on the long-term chart, medium-term, we have got these upside targets still looking pretty good, holding the 30,000 level. Taking a look at the markets now, the Nasdaq, of course, liked this inflation number, bullish on all three time frames. Upside targets to 16, 17% long long term, medium term 6%, and we've got short term targets to 6%, 2%, 4%. So really looking very good for US tech stocks. And in fact, if I look at my own tech stocks, they're all marching pretty nicely up the hill. So making a new high on this one. We need to make a new high there. But one thing you'll notice on the US stocks is that the sideways translation on these stop losses is much less long than it is, say, if I look at some of my UK stocks. This one I sold when we had a little recovery bounce. Just really wasn't going to recover. So that one was sold just over a week ago. It's been a long-term holding, but just the picture's changed, and the fact that we made that lower low, you just can't ignore that. Here we had one that fell quite heavily through the stop loss last week, but is recovering nicely. Still might be a lower low situation, so any move back below this stop and I'm out. But it's just really interesting to watch that stop. I normally give it 3 days grace, unless of course it's falling quite quickly. And here we see these two just holding on. But again, these periods of sideways translation in the UK stocks versus the US stocks, really quite key. So back to markets. Looking at some of the other markets, all pretty bullish this morning. FTSE Future up 0.4%, all going with the US really. The DAX in Germany up 0.5%, looking pretty good there. Japan was up 1%. The Sensex in India still looking very strong indeed. So we're seeing markets really moving there. We'll look at the energy mix in a minute. Taking a look at gold, we see here it's just back off those lows, that's sort of back above the 1950 level. So looking a bit better there. Was worrying at 1900. We've got a short-term upside target of 1983. But the medium-term chart still has work to do. Silver's an interesting one, sitting at 24.25, looking like it's through this critical 23.50 level and looking quite strong there. Short-term target 24.57. Taking a look at US 10-year yields, of course, they've pulled right back on that inflation number yesterday, but we really cannot ignore the long-term chart. This is going back to the 1950s. It's a monthly chart on the 10-year yield in the US. If we just look at a regression channel on there, really clear that regression channel, we've broken higher. Are we in for a period of decades like we saw before the 1970s? Long-term death of inflation? Are we seeing the beginning of something? Really hard to say, but you cannot ignore the fact that this long-term trend has been broken on the 10-year yield. So although we've seen some respite in yields for now, the long-term charts are really key. So taking a look at the energy mix now, we've got Brent crude. That's looking stronger. We've been bullish the last few days on Brent crude, back above that $80 mark. Got a target here on the medium term, on the short-term chart. This is my medium-term, short-term, 60-minute, very short-term, 1 minute. If you're trading commodities, these are the charts you need to be looking at. And here we see 83.50 as the next level. We're starting to break through on the daily, and the 60-minute has been in a clear run. Looking at US Natgas, we were neutral here this morning. We had mixed targets coming back into the cloud. We are just seeing a transition there, but the reality is it's a bit of a mixed picture for US Natgas. Coal sitting just back above the 100 level. Just couldn't quite get back above the cloud, so that's quite key. Emissions, again, we were fairly neutral here. We are just bearish below the cloud there. On the 60-minute, we've still got work to do, and no clear targets on the 1 minute chart. If we move above 88, we activate a bigger target. That's the level to watch, and that's the level we're seeing here, and that's what we've been telling clients to watch. Gas prices, we're seeing TTF just back to neutral, then down 2% this morning. So we've got downside targets here. We were bearish on that. We put that out on our morning call. We gave targets on MBP yesterday at 66 and 27, and if we look at those prices today, we are at 64 and 26. So we've gone through those targets given yesterday morning in our morning call. Looking at MBP, we see here pushing lower at these targets, really quite worrying. 53 and 60 are the levels there. Couldn't get back above the cloud. Last of all, a look at German power. This is the EX chart for German power. And looking here, we're bearish below the cloud on the daily. Bearish on that 60-minute once we broke that 135 level, which is what we were giving to clients. Really very bearish from there. And we've got downside targets to follow. That's it for today. Keep an eye on those markets. It's looking pretty good for stocks. Until next time, happy charting. Bye for now.